Haunted family, death is a doorway that we'll all have to pass through at some point in time. I've held someone's hand as they took their last breath. And I've also been one of those people who've received omens, premonitions, signs, visitors that let you know that someone close to you has passed over. We did a whole episode of our podcast on death premonitions, and in that episode we talked a little bit about some death premonitions that we have had just within our family. Holly talked about a few that she's had. We talked about our great granny's experiences. If you've not checked out that episode, I really suggest that you do. So in this episode, I have a few stories that feature loved ones coming back one last time, either to let someone know that they've passed on, or just to let them know one last time that they love them. Sit back and enjoy the show. In November of 1996, in Montana, my sister was killed in an auto accident. My family and I lived in Pennsylvania, and only 2 of my sisters could go to Montana for the funeral. My sister was deeply involved with Native American religions, so during the funeral they had a sweat lodge ritual, and other rituals which I did not understand. The night of the sweat lodge ritual, I was home with my small son and my cats. The night was clear and cold, but very calm and still. Shortly after 9 p.m., I heard knocking that started over the roof of my kitchen. The knocking traveled the entire length of my home, and then the knocking stopped. I had a strange feeling that my sister had just passed by on her way to the other side. Several weeks later, I mentioned my experience to my mother. She said that the night of the sweat lodge ritual, she and my father had been sitting in the living room watching television. There's a stairwell in the living room which goes to the upstairs bedroom. My mother has hung up photos of my great-grandparents and other family members the entire length of this stairwell. She said they heard a terrible noise, like a crashing sound, and then they looked at the stairwell, and down the steps came the photo of my great-grandparents, end over end. When it reached the bottom of the stairs, it stood straight up and stayed that way until my father grabbed it. The frame was still on the wall, the glass still secured in the frame. How the photo fell out and did its amazing antics we will never know, unless of course it was my sister stopping by there also. This story takes place on September 17th of 1967. I was living in the city of Los Angeles, a seedy area near MacArthur Park. I was 17 years old then, and I was one of those that didn't believe in the supernatural. But after this experience, I'm not so quick to brush things off. I was living with an alcoholic mom. I slept in a closet behind an old-fashioned wall bed in the apartment. The reason for this was that the closet was dark and cool. I wanted to sleep undisturbed during the night my alcoholic mom often keeps me up at night. What happened at 2:15 a.m. on the 17th of September was an unforgettable experience for me. My mom woke up crying, hysterically. I assumed she was drinking as usual and had something to do with this, but her behavior was entirely out of character for her. I know how she behaves when she's drunk, but this morning it was something else. It seemed something scared her and sobered her up pretty quickly. She was telling me that Aunt Jean, Mom's older sister, had passed away. I looked around our small apartment and there was no one else around. It was just the 2 of us. I asked her who told her that Aunt Jean had passed away. We didn't have a phone. We were both deaf, so we didn't need a phone. She replied that Jean had appeared before her, in bed. Mom saw Jean's saddened face looking at her, and she knew immediately that Jean had died. Gee, I was not one to believe this stuff, and Mom knew it. I assumed her drinking made her see things. She looked at me and said, "Frankie, I know you don't believe me. You think I'm drunk." She continued crying. I stayed up with her, comforting her for about 45 minutes, and then went back to bed. While I was laying in my bed, I looked around in the dark closet, pondering what was happening. I had strange feelings that night, even though I had not witnessed anything or seen Jean's apparition. I woke up at 10 in the morning and found Mom sitting in her chair, still crying. She looked at me and was upset that I did not believe her. She wrote a note and had me walk it over to Grandma's. Grandma, Mom's mom, lived 2 blocks from us. I met my step-grandfather halfway to their place. Grandpa told me that Aunt Jean had died at around 2 this morning. He was on his way to let us know. I was very stunned, to say the least. When we walked into Mom, just looked at us and screamed, "I told you Jean was dead! You did not believe me. You thought I was drunk." My step-grandfather was stunned and puzzled. Mom asked him if Jean was dead, and he replied yes. What am I to make of this? I cannot say it was merely coincidence. It was too much for me to write it off as just a coincidence. I know somehow Mom was able to get the information that Jean had passed away. Jean must have somehow communicated with Mom from the grave. Now my mom is dead. She died while her twin sister, Mary, was in a coma in the hospital. 1 week later, Mary passed away without ever regaining consciousness. Mom lived longer mentally than Mary, but Mary lived physically longer than Mom. They shared everything in life as twins, even in death. They are buried beside each other. I grew up in a family with strange bondness. I am a sole survivor of the family since I was in my teens. They are all dead, but my memory of them lives on, especially my memory of those strange events. For as long as I can remember, I've had the ability to sense supernatural entities, however crazy that may sound. Until a few years ago, I didn't understand exactly what I was feeling. All I knew was that I would get really uncomfortable and feel like if I turned around, I would see someone watching me. There was always a pressure like someone was sitting on my chest. This pressure would come just out of nowhere. My eyes would water uncontrollably, especially if what I'm dealing with is unfriendly. October 30th started off as a normal day. My husband was off to work. My son and I were home together. When he had finally fallen asleep for his nap, I took advantage of this time to clean up his toys. When everything was put away in his toy box, I sat down to rest. It was around 1 p.m., and all of a sudden I had this really strange pressure in my chest. I wasn't afraid, as over the past couple years, I had really been trying to develop my ability to sense things. I was just taken by surprise. I sat for a few minutes and just concentrated on what I was feeling. I honestly don't know how to explain this. I just felt like it was a man's presence. My great-grandmother had come to visit me once when I was messing with things that I shouldn't have been messing with. I remember that feeling, as strong but gentle, like a woman. This was more overpowering and almost frantic. For me, it was very annoying and very uncomfortable. I sat and thought about who it could be. All of the men I thought were family, but I couldn't understand why they would come to me. Traditionally, the belief is that since Halloween was coming, the spirit world and the living world can communicate. At this point, I was pretty intrigued. This went on and on. About an hour later, my son woke, and we went to his bedroom for a diaper change. I remember distinctly scanning the living room as we walked from his playpen to make sure that all of his toys were picked up. As we re-entered the living room a few minutes later, I looked over in the direction of the front door. Sitting right in the way of the front door was a toy that never gets played with, a little crawling Mickey Mouse that had been in the middle of the bottom part of the toy box. He never plays with it. No more than 10 minutes later, my husband's mother called me. She was on her way up to her mother's apartment. Her brother, Roger, had passed away early that morning in his sleep at her mother's apartment. She lived in a retirement community, and a nurse making early morning rounds had came in and found Roger on the floor in the living room. I automatically knew who it was. It was knowledge like I know the sun will rise and set. And I also knew why Roger had came to me. In the past couple years, he and my mother-in-law had locked horns numerous times. There had been hard feelings. There are a few reasons that Roger came here. He really thought that Duncan was great. Duncan is my son. My husband and I, especially me, had no ill feelings to him at all. He also didn't understand what was happening to him. He didn't know where to go. I lit a white candle. I explained to him that everything was okay and that he needed to go into the light. No one was mad at him anymore, and he was loved. It took a little while, about an hour, I think, for him to make up his mind. Every time I thought he was gone, I would feel him again. Finally, he went. This experience has left no fear in me at all. In fact, when things like this happen, it's always a little reassuring. We really do go on. I haven't told my mother-in-law about this. We don't always get along, and I'm not sure how she would react. Maybe someday I will.